समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या समझ में नहीं आया?
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
China showed the world a massive display of military strength and might, coming close on the heels of the power huddle between Prime Minister Modi, Xi Jinping, and Vladimir Putin. There has been clear signaling to Donald Trump, a signaling of defiance and an assertion of strategic autonomy. From India's perspective, there has been a cautious rapprochement, it's perhaps too early to call it a reset, with China. But what remains unclear is whether any of this is getting through to Donald Trump, or has the ship sailed from the port where India-US relations might be fixed. There certainly seems no immediate fix in sight. How might geopolitics be upended? We'll find out from our panel of experts this evening. I'm Barkha Dutt, you're with the Mojo Story. On the program today, we continue to decode the ramifications of Trump's tariffs. Trump seems to have muted down just a bit, but who can tell with President Trump? In any case, there seems to be some good cop, bad cop strategy on in the Trump administration, with his key trade aide, Peter Navarro, lashing out at India on a daily basis, including calling Russia's invasion of Ukraine Modi's war. In the meantime, the dramatic images from China, there's Modi with Putin, there's the power huddle we've all seen, Modi, Putin, and Xi Jinping standing together in a corner, seemingly chuckling over something, a shared joke, or maybe my enemy's enemy is my friend moment. We don't know. Modi is back, but China has displayed, to the West in particular, a mighty display of its strength. Standing by Xi Jinping's side at the China military parade today were leaders who would be considered pariahs in the West. North Korea, Russia, Iran. Of course, Pakistan's Asim Munir was also in attendance. What happens next? How are geopolitics going to be upended? What shape and form is the world going to take? FM Jaishankar today said India would be investing in multipolarity with a focus on strategic autonomy. Let's introduce our panel of experts to understand how the world is changing and will change further. Professor Happymon Jacob is with us. He's the editor of India's World magazine, one of India's leading journals on foreign policy affairs. I urge you all to have a look at it. Also joining us is a veteran diplomat, Ambassador Manjeev Puri. Always a pleasure, sir. Joining us from London today is Chris Blackburn, foreign affairs analyst. Good to have you back with us, Chris. And welcoming to the program from the United States of America today is the chairman of Whalen Global Advisors and best-selling author, Chris Whalen. Good to see you all. Let me get started by playing out Trump's latest. I don't know if I'm imagining it. Seemed a little bit softer than before, but like I said, who's to know with Trump? Even so, take a look.
Reducing the tariffs on India from 50%.
What does that mean?
Are you considering taking away some of the tariffs that you've imposed on India? You had posted.
No, we get along with India very well, but India has, you have to understand, for many years it was a one-sided relationship. Only now, since I came along, and because of the power that we have with tariffs, India was charging us tremendous tariffs, about the highest in the world. They were about the highest in the world, number one. And we therefore weren't doing much business with India, but they were doing business with us because we weren't charging them. Foolishly, we weren't charging them. So they would send in massive, everything they made, they'd send it in, pour it into our country. Therefore, it wouldn't be made here, which is a negative. But we would not send in anything because they were charging us 100% tariffs. And, I'll give you an example. Harley Davidson. Harley Davidson couldn't sell into India. There was a 200% tariff on a motorcycle. So what happens? Harley Davidson went to India and built a motorcycle plant. And now they don't have to pay tariffs. Same thing as us.
So, Ambassador Puri, I'll start with you. By Trump's standards, and certainly by the language we've seen Pete Navarro use in recent days, whether it's Brahmins profiteering, Delhi as a laundromat for the Kremlin, Modi's war, this is tame stuff from Donald Trump. Do you think this is in response to the images out of the SEO summit? Do you think he has other fish to fry at home? Or do we just not know?
I don't know can you hear me, Barkha? Yeah. So, Barkha, look, I don't want to look at all of this in such simplistic fashion. He sees a photograph, we moved on the other side. Look, if Donald Trump thought we were critical to his policies globally, then many of these things wouldn't have happened. He hasn't thought his greatest allies, the Europeans, are of importance. So, I'm not talking about isolationist America, etc. But that's the nature of the individual. Now, let's remember several things. There are army exercises taking place in Alaska. There are many other things happening. So, in some senses, you can say between yesterday and today, some words which are softer. But is he backing down on tariffs? The answer is no. And let's make it very clear. He said so very well. Look, my understanding is, after hearing the Commerce Minister yesterday say that, we have, in a sense, restarted the negotiations, hopefully by November. I really hope that somehow or the other, that punitive business, the 25% because of buying Russian oil, goes away somehow or the other as a result of a deal which has nothing to do with India and the United States. The rest of it, we can negotiate. And yes, we will have to give in a certain amount. I want to just draw your attention something, Barkha. Some weeks back on your program, you had somebody who's an Indian retailer somewhere in the United States who said it makes no difference. The cover of the New Indian Express today in the United States, the New India Abroad, says Indian communities hit by tariffs. These are the realities of things. This is an economy of importance to us. It's an importance at various levels. So let's hope on his side there's some softening. I don't think it's because of the SEO kind of thing. There, his interests are different. In some senses, he would look at it and say, look, it proves the point. That's the other king. I should make a deal with them.
And in a way, what you're saying before I open this up is it all boils down to India losing or diminishing in value to his calculations.
That's not true. Yeah. But I wouldn't say that. I want to say that we should not have ever estimated us to be very high up in his calculation. This is a different matter from your saying diminished. No, it hasn't diminished. In his calculation where we were, I don't think that has changed much. But we shouldn't have, let me say, overestimated our own importance. This is the other side. It's one thing to say how important you think you are to them. It's another thing to know how important they think you are to them. And that calculus has changed because there's a new president on the presidential chair, and his way of thinking is completely different. It's not really the neocon worldview. It's very different. He's happy to make deals with others who he thinks are his ilk, and so on. Remember, at Shanghai, in China, President Putin is reported to have said, I have a good relationship with President Trump. He's listening to me. So let's listen to all of these particular things. What we've done, we had to do. I won't only take it to be a rebound. I would say it's part of what you quoted the foreign minister saying, look, India must pursue multi-alignment, strategic autonomy. We must do that. We shouldn't shy away. That doesn't mean at the same time keeping lines open, trying to see what we can do within our own guardrails with the United States is not critically important for India.
Let me bring in Chris Whalen at this point. There is a sense that Trump may want to cooperate with China and not compete with him. That indeed there may have been some sort of recalculation in Trump's sort of mind about India's importance, and that might have something to do with his wanting to cut a deal with the Chinese. How are the American people, how are people like yourselves viewing this tariff war?
Well, I don't think most Americans think about trade policy at all. In fact, I would say to you all that the old way of doing things, the old way of cutting deals and bilateral trade agreements is really going by the by. Donald Trump is accelerating a process of change where the world is going to see the dollar no longer as the reserve currency. We're seeing a migration away from dollars back to gold. Gold is now the largest asset held by global central banks. And what President Trump is saying to the entire world is that we want reciprocity. We want equality in terms of trade, which means competition. This is very different from the model we have had for most of my life, and indeed going back to the Bretton Woods Agreement, where the U.S. was the engine and we were buying product from many other countries, and we allowed them to protect their domestic industries. He's basically saying, no, we're going to go to a multilateral framework where we all compete. And we may be polite to one another in terms of day-to-day relations, but I think Trump ultimately is looking at the aggregate trade imbalance in the U.S., the balance of the current account, the rest of it, and then he has a massive debt problem, which we're still not really talking about. So when he is not a neocon at all. You mentioned that in your introduction. He is trying, in fact, to rebut and I think reverse some of the neocon craziness, which was both Republicans and Democrats. Let's remember, the people who were working for Joe Biden, encouraging the war in the Ukraine, had worked for George W. Bush. So Trump is really against that. He's not a warmonger at all. And yet he is, as you noted, he has his own style and his own perspective, but it's very much different from what we've dealt with for the last 50 years.
Before I go to Happymon and Chris, the other Chris, I want to ask you, Chris Whalen, I agree that most Americans aren't thinking about trade policies, nor are most Indians, except for how it may impact them directly. But this isn't about trade anymore. This is about the souring of a relationship between two countries. It's about China getting the advantage from that. It's about Trump wanting to come home with a win on Russia, Ukraine, and failing to do so at Alaska. It's about him getting angry, as he sees it, that India didn't give him credit for his role, which India denies, in brokering peace between India and Pakistan. So this is about something as complex as tariffs alone.
I wouldn't personalize it with Trump. You should take him seriously, but don't take him literally, because the message changes every day. That's something you need to understand, whether it's domestic or foreign affairs. They want a press release every day. They want the president on the front of the New York Post, which is his favorite newspaper, of course. And, that's really it. It's a work in progress. Every day is a new day. And that's just his style. Does he have an ultimate goal as far as U.S. trade relations with other countries? Yes, but again, reciprocity is what he wants. And that is not what we have had. So, other nations of the world have to realize that what he's implying is self-sufficiency for each nation. He wants each nation to be their own engine of growth, so the U.S. doesn't have to run big trade deficits. And remember, the whole caveat or the necessary condition of the dollar as the global money is that we have to have very high external deficits and more recently very high internal inflation. That's not sustainable. So there is going to be change, whether it's Donald Trump or his successor. Doesn't matter. We are going to witness some rather significant change in the global economy.
Let me bring in Happymon Jacob at this point. Professor Jacob, when you hear Chris Whalen talking, a lot of it, in his estimation, is driven by, Trump's economic sort of calculations for the United States of America. The way we are seeing it in India is it's all about a sulking American president. There's obviously some middle ground between those two. Often in foreign policy, it's a little bit of everything. And then chemistry that seemed to be working between the two principals seems to have, by all accounts, by all the reporting available, have soured, in particular after a particularly acrimonious conversation on the 17th of June. So much so that even the New York Times is now reporting that India wasn't keen to get onto the phone and have a conversation between the two leaders because they weren't sure how that conversation would be handled on social media or mishandled. How are you seeing it? You're in America. I do agree with Chris Whalen that probably most people in America don't know the first of what's happening. And the only time the Western media really picked up the story is when they saw Putin, Xi Jinping, and Modi together.
Barkha, I think this is not something that is sui generis vis-a-vis India. This is happening to pretty much every country in the world. I don't think we should take it too personally, not too emotionally. Trump has basically upended the rules of geopolitics that we are all familiar with. In the sort of before Trump came in, the rules of the American geopolitics was that China is the primary contradiction, and there is a contestation between China and Russia and the United States of America. And India was important because Indo-Pacific was important. Trump has come in and said, wait a minute, I don't have a problem with Xi. I don't have a problem with Putin, and I'm not interested in the Indo-Pacific. And that changes things for us. I think we should look at it from through the prism of geopolitics. The rules of geopolitics have changed, and therefore we must also change. Now, this also means that a country like India will have to, keeping emotions and feelings aside, take clinical steps and be very clear about it as to what it wants to do. Now, for example, therefore, India making the argument about reaching out to China or reaching out to President Putin in Russia, reinvigorating its engagement with the SCO. All of this is, I think, in line with our potential response to something that's happening geopolitically, because it's not. It may be one could interpret this as Trump being Trump, but it's beyond Trump being Trump. There is a new chapter that the United States is writing when it comes to global geopolitics, and I think we must be keenly aware of that, and don't think that this is something that is going to go away 2 months, 3 months from now. Actions have consequences. The American actions today vis-a-vis India, some of which are castigating remarks about India, will have consequences, geopolitical consequences. But I think the only point that I want to make, in line with what Ambassador Puri made earlier, is that we should be very clear in our own mind that this is not just about us. It is a larger question of geopolitics that is being played out, and therefore we must make our choices carefully, rather than.
But have we chosen to react briefly, Happymon, because I want to go to Chris Blackburn. But I was interviewing Ian Bremmer the other day, and he said, "Listen, I mean, other countries came, they flattered him, they said, oh, you should get a Nobel. You could have also said it. What's the big deal? It's stupid." This is what he said. He said, it's stupid, but does it matter? Flatter him. So the reason I'm bringing this up is Trump has dealt this hand to others, but they haven't reacted in the way that we have. We have refused to flatter him. And I think it began with his jumping the gun and making the Ops Sindoor announcement before India could.
Right. I think who are the countries who have reached out to Trump and flattered him? It's Pakistan. It is the European Union, it is Japan, and many of the treaty allies or countries of that sort. They have a reason to do so because their security in some ways is dependent on the United States and its assurances. India is not a treaty partner, treaty ally of the United States. India has no reason why that it should reach out to Washington and sort of supplicate before Trump. There's no reason to do that. I think India is, in my opinion, doing the right thing by not engaging in an anti-Trump rhetoric. It is not. I mean, none of our policymakers are making that argument. It is also not supplicating to Trump. For a country that seeks to be a pole in a multipolar world, I don't think India has the luxury of supplicating before Trump.
And to that extent, it's very interesting what Happymon says, and we'll come back to it in the program. This idea that India is neither supplicating nor going crazy about what Navarro says and answering back in kind. Some people have suggested this is the formalism of Indian diplomacy. It's past its sell-by date. I think what Happymon is saying is this works well. It shows we are holding our nerve. Chris Blackburn, one of the other mysteries is Trump's approach to Pakistan. You have former NSA Jake Sullivan going on record to say he thinks it's got something to do with business links between Trump's family and Pakistan's crypto council. Others say it's because Pakistan has flattered him. Some others say it's transitory, won't last long. How do you read it?
Yeah, I think you're right, because basically what you said in the introduction, the US is trying sort of a good cop, bad cop with the tariff wars. But on top of that, we've got the Ukraine and Russia conflict, which I think Trump sincerely wants to complete and to make sure there is a peace. But obviously, the things on the ground have gone to the side. But I think Chris and Happymon are right that we're in a new global world order, and things are up in the air. But I think that the Trump's sort of diplomatic status of poking all allies in the eye and being disparaging against India is ultimately, I think, long-term counterproductive to a stable strategic partnership with India. I think we've seen also in Japan, they've said they want greater autonomy from the United States on economic and yes, we know security-wise they're joined at the hip, but people are having to reassess themselves, their strategic relationship with the Trump administration, because people wake up every morning not knowing what this administration stands for, what its doctrine is. Is there a Trump doctrine out there? No, there isn't. In his clash of styles with other sort of ministries of foreign affairs, we know he's gutted Foggy Bottom in the State Department. But somebody in that cabinet, which is probably one of the most pro-India cabinets we've ever seen, somebody in that cabinet should be saying, listen, you've gone too far with the personal remarks. Peter Navarro's talking about Modi's war and Brahmins getting involved in the economy.
Yeah.
In any lesser country, that could have been seen as a sort of a prelude or a spark to an uprising, say in a country like Bangladesh or elsewhere. So this is really inflammatory language, and I think Trump, if he is playing the good cop, needs to rein in Navarro.
That's a great point. And then maybe there is a good cop, bad cop strategy. I want to play out a very interesting comment from Foreign Minister Jaishankar today. This is a kind of reinforcement about the future for India being about multi-alignment, which is interesting. This isn't India picking China over the United States of America or picking, another pole instead of the American pole. I want to play out this comment and we'll come right back.
For us, this is an enormously important relationship. This relationship is growing in substance. And I can see at this time of uncertainties that actually it has a greater value. It's a very steady relationship. It is a relationship where largely what we promise to each other and policies that we have remain constant and remain predictable. So, predictability today has a huge premium in global politics. So let me conclude by stressing today that we see the world facing the twin challenges of economic volatility and political uncertainty. We believe that a multipolar world with strategic autonomy can best respond through more intensive consultations and cooperation among key member states.
I should clarify that the relationship he was talking about was after meeting the Germans and not the Americans. And he made that little dig about predictability having a big premium. But to the last point first, Ambassador Puri, the sort of economic volatility, the political uncertainty. To an extent, Chris Whalen is saying whether you like it or not, the world is changing. Trump has some part in it, but it's not the only part. The world is just changing. And diplomacy, geopolitics will have to change with it. Ambassador Puri?
Barkha, look, Chris is absolutely right. Of course, the world is changing. For the first time since the Industrial Revolution, you have a non-Caucasian country sitting at the very high table, whether you like it or not, the Chinese. But President Trump, within the past 6 odd months, has done so much that, whether we like it or not, and we can debate which side it's going, there's a great deal of consequences to what he's saying in terms of even the United States and its positioning in the world. Now, you just had the External Affairs Minister. Look, I have a very simple point there, and thank you for pointing out that this was in the context of the Germans. Yeah. Why shouldn't multipolarity, multi-alignment, strategic autonomy always have been our thing? This lean that we showed very, very significantly is what is making us feel pained at the moment. If this wasn't the case, it wouldn't have happened. There was this thing, and Happymon, thank you for pointing out all of this. When you mentioned that, why didn't we do, I don't want to use the F word, flattery, etc. But the fact is, were we not the first to go there? Did we not want an invitation? Did we not want to do it? We did all that we did. So, there are differences to what you can do. I go back to the same thing, that in the overall calculation of things, we must be much more realistic. And that's why, in my opinion, multi-alignment, multipolarity, I am even happy with the old word of non-alignment. These have not just time-tested. I haven't lived in the village all my life. These are good reasons for us to be pursuing them because they fit with what we are. The largest country, today the fifth largest economy, etc., etc., and with a contested border and so on. And so, therefore, this bit of having eggs in several baskets is an important element, and it shouldn't be a case of rebound. It should always have been our case, and I hope it always was.
So effectively, you are saying, Ambassador Puri, that the mistake was, if we can come out of these pictures, the mistake was leaning or slanting towards the United States, whether you want to, much more than lean, slanting, and that we were able or more willing to flatter as long as it didn't hurt us. And now when it started to hurt our interests, we have said no flattery. We're not going to sort of lie at your feet. And you're saying this would never have happened had we remained kind of the middle path that we've always been known for.
True. We may not have got some of the benefits which we think we got. I must make the point very clear that for me, the relationship with the United States, economic, military, and others, is very, very important. But at the same time, India being the country that it is, its size and so on and so forth, it has to, in a sense, ply its own curve. And that's a little important in various ways. I know we are 139th out of 193 in GDP per capita. I know all of that. But despite that, the fact that we are the 5th largest economy also, has a certain role. And that's why that's been the traditional thinking in India, not really wrong.
Chris Whalen, I want to bring you in on the changes that you see coming and where you see China fitting into those changes.
Well, look, the BRICS nations have been a reaction against America's weaponization of the dollar, the sanctions regime, many other aspects, which really go back to the Biden administration. Unfortunately, the war in Ukraine has become the defining test for the Trump administration because he views it as a disaster. He views the whole thing as a terrible mistake, and he would like to end the war. Putin, on the other hand, has no interest in ending the war. He would like to take over all of the Ukraine. And this implies, frankly, I think, a future military conflict with NATO. As you can see, the Germans and the others are getting ready to put troops into the Ukraine. This is not going to end well. So that's one thing. The foreign policy aspects of this are clear. The other part, though, remember, is that the BRICS nations are in no way, shape, or form ready to create their own economic ecosystem with a currency, with financing capacity. That's all still in the dollars. So what I'm worried about, looking at our fiscal situation and frankly, the extraordinary speculative nature of the financial markets in the U.S. today, is that we're going to see the dollar decline, even from where it is now. We're at the lows of the last Trump administration, and I think it's going to decline further. So what this means is that other nations in the world are going to lose markets in the U.S., whether they have trade access or not, simply because the dollar is going to diminish in value. And that's something I think we all have to think about for the future. Because, the dollar has been kept up because of finance. It's not because we're competitive in a commercial sense. It's because we're sucking all of the excess capital around the world into the U.S. financial markets. That's going to have an end. And I think people ought to start preparing for that because it means that multilateral relationships in trade, in finance are going to become more important over time. And it's also going to challenge other nations to say, will you grow your currency to accommodate greater trade with other nations, which means you're going to have to import some inflation. So these are all very difficult things because we've lived with a fixed world built around the dollar for 75 years. And it worked until now.
And yet you don't actually see an alternative currency emerging on the global stage. Not right now, at least.
At the moment, it's called gold. We're going back to the future. None of the other nations, even Europe, think about it. Where would you go if you sold all your dollars tomorrow? Would you go into Euro? The Swiss don't want you, so they're not going to let you come in. Japan? No. China? No. I mean, the totality of the China financial markets is a rounding error compared to the dollar system.
Yeah, so that is, I think, an excellent point and things that we don't think often enough about, Happymon, when we look at things, divorced from economics and only through our understanding of national security. And I think Chris Whalen reminds us that all of these things are interconnected, which is why even Jaishankar mentioned economic volatility and political uncertainty together. And Happymon, what would India be looking out for in the next few weeks and months, you think, or the world be looking out to see?
Very quickly, Barkha, before I come to that question, may I sort of, reiterate what Ambassador Puri said, which is, I think we must also take some credit for telling the world that multi-alignment is important. Today, everyone wants to be multi-aligned, right? Everyone wants a multipolar world. I think the world is now realizing the ills of a unipolar America. And therefore, I think India, not just India, but every other country is trying to be more and more multi-aligned in the days going forward. But having said that, let me sort of also tell you, Barkha, that we should not, in all this cacophony and noise, we should not lose sight of the fundamental contradictions that India faces and the basic interests that we have. And I'm very clear in my mind that China, this may be a good season with China, but China is not India's best friend. China is our fundamental primary contradiction. There's no doubt about that in my mind. I think we must keep that in mind. And Russia is losing interest in India. I will also put my neck out and say that this is not the 1990s or 2010s. Russia is also losing interest in India. And India's primary interest is in the Indo-Pacific. India must move towards the West in some ways, sign the FTAs and, have conversations with the Japanese, the Australians, the Koreans. That is the age we must enter. So I think all this noise about the trio building a new bloc, India, Russia, and China, I think we must see.
Why do you say the Russians are losing interest in India? I'm very interested in that.
Well, because India is losing interest in Russia too, right? I mean, India's relationship with Russia is not the relationship that we used to have, say, 10 years ago or 15 years ago. India is looking at new partners. So Russia will also look at new partners. And today, for instance, China is probably more important to Russia than India is. So it's a natural consequence of the geopolitics that is being played out. There's nothing personal about it, right? So I think we must not lose sight of these facts. We must also not lose sight of the fact that Indo-Pacific is important for India. The United States is important for India, as Ambassador Puri pointed out, and the Europeans and the Koreans and the Japanese and the Australians are important to India. So I think these primary interests must be kept on top of our agenda.
I couldn't agree with you more on China, and I want to bring in Chris Blackburn, into this conversation. The fact is that a few weeks ago, we had our Deputy Chief of Army on record talking about not just China's providing of weapons platforms to Pakistan, but actually actively backing them in that conflict between India and Pakistan. So I think I agree with Happymon. A good season does not, a summer, or does not make for a permanent deepening of relations. It may not. At the moment, we don't have the evidence. And therefore, China is the contradiction. It's actually the contradiction for India. It's the contradiction for the US. I would say it's a contradiction for both.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think Happymon raised some good points. But I think with the Chinese, they're in the driving seat at the minute, especially with the United States and Donald Trump being so sort of chaotic. And as Jaishankar said, people are wanting a degree of certainty, and the US just simply isn't providing that at the moment. So I think if the Chinese actually do decide that they want to change behaviors, and we've seen that in the Himalayas, where they've gone from the salami slicing and the sort of tensions on the border. I think for the Chinese and Russia, I think, has been a major mediator between the two. I think if the Chinese changes behavior, then it completely changes the game yet again. So I think India has to weigh that up. Well, is the US a reliable partner on a strategic level, or are they better off playing their hedges and playing between East and West? I think Jaishankar and everybody else, you want certainty. You want a certainty in those strategic relationships, and the US isn't providing it.
I want to take last comments from all of you. Briefly, I'll start with you, Chris Blackburn. The one thing in this age of uncertainty that you'd be watching most closely, let's say in the next 6 months, to all of you. I'll start with you, Chris Blackburn.
Well, I think just Ukraine, Russia, it's at the height of the to-do list in Washington. And I think India is becoming a bit of a casualty in that. It's got the trade wars and the peace negotiations. India's taking the flak for all of that. So I think that's the conflict that we have to look at.
And I want to bring you in, Happymon. Would it also be Ukraine, Russia for you?
No, I think it's going to be, for me, it's going to be the India-US relationship. There will be a lot of unhappiness in India. There will be anti-Americanism growing on social media in India. But I think as a big country, as a mature nation, we should be able to see through some of the present difficulties and look at the larger interests. The relationship between India and the United States, how that pans out, will have implications for the Indo-Pacific, for Asia in general, and for the America's relationship with China and India's relationship with China. So I think it's a key relationship in some ways.
Chris Whalen, what is it for you? The value of the dollar? What are you going to be looking out for?
Well, I mean, two things. First off, don't get too excited about the strength of Russia and China. These are two very weak regimes. You know, I would note that while they were having these parades in Beijing, Xi Jinping just conducted another purge of the Chinese military, which does not tell me that he's feeling secure. This man has been eliminating rivals all around him for his entire career. And I think that that's, you know, part and parcel of an economy that is slanted towards exports, that is largely mercantilistic in design. That, to me, is the big change that we're going to see. I think we'll sort out the Ukraine. It's a tragedy, but, you know, it will be resolved one way or another. I just hope we don't see a further military conflict involving Europe. But yeah, I think the big movement that we all have to start to put into our calculus is the dollar and the declining role of the dollar as the global currency. It implies a lot of change for many other nations, including India. India is going to have to expand its currency. They're going to have to expand their financial markets, allow people to finance natively in India, and that's going to require a lot of change.
Ambassador Puri, the last word to you.
Barkha.
What will you?
Barkha,
yeah.
Let me take the ball from where Chris Whalen just stepped off. Look, there is a new kid on the block that we all know quite clearly. Obviously, it has to come at some kind of price. I'm very clear in my mind that given where India is, the kind of country that it is, this whole thing of strategic autonomy, this lean needs to be less, strategic autonomy needs to be more. Of course, it means strong relations with the United States, especially for many, many years to come, because the others don't have that ability. But for us, politically, etc., this is extremely important, and we need to therefore build this relationship, but at the same time ensure that nobody else perceives this lean to be total and completely on that side. Multipolarity, multi-alignment, strategic autonomy, you can call it whatever. That's a walk, that's a talk that we must walk in reality.
Well, we leave it there. I think we're entering a period of extreme volatility where literally all bets are off the table. I don't think any of us can be clairvoyant about even the next 6 months. A lot of balls up in the air. Thank you so much, gentlemen, to Chris Whalen, Chris Blackburn, Ambassador Puri, Dr. Happymon Jacob. Thank you. Pleasure as always. To our audience, thank you. See you tomorrow.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Motor Story and support independent, robust journalism.